Hi, I'm George Robertson, and I kind of have a sad story to tell you. It involves Krista McAuliffe and the NASA Space Shuttle program. In the 1960s, NASA was on top of the world with providing the first ever men to walk on the surface of the moon. From Neil Armstrong to Buzz Aldrin and John Young, the 12 men who walked on the surface of the moon were on top of the world, and NASA couldn't be stopped. Due to budget cuts, the Apollo program had to shut down, but behind the scenes, NASA was working on a brand new spacecraft. In the mid-1970s came the unveiling of the Space Shuttle. The Space Shuttle is a reusable rocket, a first of its kind. Astronauts would launch into low Earth orbit and land like a plane. Some called it a flying brick.
The shuttle really never left low Earth orbit. It was particularly designed for three main tasks. A, delivering astronauts and cargo to the International Space Station, servicing satellites already in orbit, and delivering payload satellites to orbit.
NASA has developed 5 of these space shuttles: Atlantis, Discovery, Endeavour, Challenger, and Columbia. The first mission launching in 1981, the last ending in 2011, a 30-year run for the program. After around the first 20 missions of the program, the popularity has started to lose interest into the shuttle because of how successful it was. It became a victim of its own success. In NASA's attempt to bring the popularity back to the shuttle, they had decided to have the first ever civilian in space. Then came the Teacher in Space program. If you Google Teacher in Space, you will see Krista McAuliffe pop up. How was she able to fly?
There was the Reagan administration at the time, and Reagan wanted to get more interest in space flight. And so one of the ideas he had was, how about we take teachers, civilians, make them astronauts and send them up into space. Go like, hey, like anyone can do this, you know. And the kids that come, when they come back, it's like, oh yeah, that's so cool. And then that motivates public opinion towards space flight and allows the government to give more funding towards the space program.
The program's goal is to bring teachers into space as non-astronaut workers. More than 11,000 teachers applied to the program. Krista McAuliffe, a high school social studies teacher from Concord, New Hampshire, was selected, as well as Barbara Morgan, an elementary school teacher from Idaho, as her backup. Krista and the STS-51L crew would take place on the Challenger orbiter, the workhorse of all the shuttles, on what will be the 25th flight of the program.
So basically what Krista McAuliffe's mission was, the NASA had assigned her, obviously not having any background as an astronaut before this mission, was to teach a class from space, which from my understanding was going to be done via live broadcast being sent back to her students on Earth.
The crew along were Commander Dick Scobie, pilot Michael Smith, mission specialist Ellison Onizuka, Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, Gregory Jarvis, and Krista McAuliffe.
What a lot of people may not know about the Challenger disasters, there actually were some calls to concern before the Challenger had taken off that day. The particular day in question, it was an unnaturally cold day in Cape Canaveral. Well, I mean, we're talking icicles forming off of the launch pad. And the shuttle had never been launched in such low temperatures. It had never even been designed to have been launched in such low temperatures, because who would think it would be that cold in Florida?
During the countdown, around 17% of Americans were watching the coverage of the Challenger mission due to Krista McAuliffe being on board. On January 25th, 1986 in Cape Canaveral, Florida, at 11:38 a.m. local time, after days of delays, Challenger's STS-51L mission and crew take off. After about a minute into the flight, Mission Control tells Commander Dick Scobie, "Challenger, go with throttle up." However, 73 seconds during the flight, at around 46,000 feet, the Challenger orbiter started disintegrating. The shuttle at the time had no real escape system planned, leaving the crew trapped in the cockpit. Viewers on the ground and on TV watched in horror as they see the exploding spacecraft right before their eyes. The crew was still alive after the breakup, at about 12 miles above the surface. At some point, the crew and the debris started falling down. At a rate of about 200 miles per hour, the crew in the trapped cockpit hit the water, killing all 7 of the astronauts. America was in shock. In about an hour, everyone around the world have heard the news of the disaster. Because of this disaster, NASA put the Space Shuttle program on hold for 32 months. The Space Shuttle Challenger disaster not only was a major tragedy, but was also a major setback in space exploration. It has halted NASA from sending regular folks into space. After NASA picked up the pieces, an investigation takes place. The investigation concludes that the cause of the disaster was the failure of two rubber O-rings that seals the joint in the lower parts of the right-hand solid rocket booster.
Essentially what the concern was is that the solid rocket boosters, the SRBs, the concern was that they had O-rings inside of them that were helping direct and channel the solid fuel out of the nozzle. O-rings had never experienced such a low temperature, and they were concerned, a few engineers were concerned, that it possibly could crack the O-rings, the low temperature could. A couple seconds after takeoff, one of the O-rings, as predicted, cracked. A plume of fire jets out from the side of the SRB into the orange fuel tank, causing a massive explosion.
The Rogers Commission took another investigation on what went wrong that day. They have concluded that NASA was also at fault for the disaster, with ignoring their own safety rules and ignoring warnings from engineers on launching in such cold, extreme conditions.
So even though these concerns were voiced, they largely fell on deaf ears. The main reason being is because they had already delayed the launch a couple of times, and they really wanted this propaganda flight to take place with the teacher. The reports were acknowledged, but nothing was done about them, and they proceeded with the launch, which is where disaster strikes.
17 years later, after the disaster of Challenger, the Space Shuttle Columbia accident took place in February of 2003, right when NASA was thinking of resending civilian astronauts back into space. During the launch of STS-107, a piece of debris falls off from the external fuel tank, hitting the orbiter, thus creating a hole. During re-entry, this causes the orbiter to disintegrate, killing all 7 of the astronauts. NASA then puts the Space Shuttle program into another halt. A year after the disaster, President George W. Bush has declared that by 2010, the Space Shuttle program will come to an end. 22 missions later, with the completion of the International Space Station in 2011, STS-135 crew and Space Shuttle Atlantis returns home, thus completing the Space Shuttle cycle.